today. It's a great honor to have with us the Undersecretary, Department of Homeland Security, Suzanne Spaulding. She's not a stranger to us. A lot of interaction over the years, but the one I remember best is when I had an opportunity to testify back on FISA in 2007. Suzanne, who had worked for the ranking member, chairman of that committee, of Senate Judiciary Committee in the past, was a great counselor and helper in getting ready for that. I think, as history has pointed out, we were on track, even more so than maybe we knew at the time, pointing out the concerns and problems in the area. But on to a more traditional introduction. Suzanne is, as I said, Undersecretary at Homeland Security for National Protection and Programs Directorate. Her role in over the years has included House Representative, Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Ranking Member for Jane Harmon, as General Counsel for Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. She also worked 6 years at the CIA. We won't ask for details on all of that. Special Counsel and Legislative Director for Senator Arlen Specter. She also more recently had been asked by Governor Warner right after 9/11 to basically deal with and help advise the Commonwealth of Virginia on how to respond in critical infrastructure ways. She has served as an advisor, Cybersecurity Legal Task Force. If it's cybersecurity, terrorism, security, surveillance issues, Suzanne has been a player and from what I believe and have seen, a very positive player trying to nudge people in the right direction. And it's an honor to have her with us again today. Please welcome me in joining her.
Thank you very much, Ed. That was very, very kind. And you know, it was a great experience for me as well. And I thought you showed great courage that day in front of the U.S. Senate. And this group really has been in the forefront. You describe yourselves in large part as being focused on innovation, and I think it's an indication that you are able to kind of see over the horizon and around the corners, and you have been in the forefront of some of these important issues, and I really commend you for it. And it's one of the reasons that I was really pleased to have the opportunity to come and speak to you this afternoon, and I'm extremely impressed that on a beautiful afternoon with the cherry blossoms in full bloom, that you're in this room. And I take it, not as a testament to my ability to draw you here, but to your commitment to getting these issues right and having your voice heard in a way that is informed by the kinds of folks that you've been listening to today. So I really thank you for that and really commend you for that. And I will try to reward you with keeping my remarks relatively brief. I really would love to hear from you. As Ed said, I am the Undersecretary for something called the National Protection and Programs Directorate at the Department of Homeland Security, NPPD. And that name tells you nothing, I know. So let me tell you what we do. We have the overarching mission of strengthening the security and resilience of our nation's critical infrastructure. So, we think of, when you hear infrastructure, you first think of buildings and roads and bridges. And of course, as you know, when we talk about critical infrastructure, we're talking much more broadly. But basically about all of those goods, services, and things that underpin and enable and sustain our ways of life. So it's when you get up in the morning and you flip the switch that the lights go on, and you go to brush your teeth and the water comes out, and you go into your kitchen and you're able to make yourself some breakfast, get in your car and use the transportation infrastructure, get to the office, turn on your computer and it comes on. All of those things that we take for granted, but that, as you all know, are potentially at risk from both physical and cyber events, both man-made and natural hazards. And so our responsibility at the Department of Homeland Security within the U.S. government is to really lead a whole of nation effort to strengthen the security and resilience of that critical infrastructure. The definition for critical infrastructure is asset systems and networks, physical or virtual, the disruption of which would have a debilitating impact on national security, economic security, and public health and safety. So it's a pretty broad definition, and as I say, we've divided it up into 16 different sectors, but it really encompasses a wide range of activities. And we are very intent on making sure that as we go out and partner with our private sector critical infrastructure owners and operators, both in the government and in the private sector, that we are encouraging them to do as we are trying to do, which is to look at that risk across physical and cyber. To look at this as we talk a lot today, and I've used the term resilience. Those of us who've been at this for a while remember when the buzzword was continuity of operations. And I'm beginning to think we need to go back to that terminology because it is a much clearer way of articulating what we're talking about. What we're talking about is sustaining that functionality that is so important to allow those basic goods and services and activities to continue. So it really is at the heart of it. And if you think about that, your operations can be disrupted in a whole variety of ways. And it doesn't matter really, if you're the CEO, it doesn't really matter to you very much whether that disruption came about as a result of a storm or a sabotage or a cyber incident. What you care about at the bottom is making sure that you can continue to provide those goods and services. And so that we are looking at this very much across physical and cyber. Having said that, I know that the focus today, what I've been asked to focus on, is our approach to cybersecurity. And so starting with that, I would point out that our shop, NPPD, we have the lead for protecting civilian.gov and for coordinating a whole-of-nation approach to helping to strengthen security and resilience of .com. But we are only one part of DHS that's involved in cyber. And a lot of folks, you all probably are well aware of this, but a lot of folks don't realize the U.S. Secret Service, first of all, that it's part of the Department of Homeland Security, but secondly, that it has a very important role in cybersecurity. And this, of course, stems from their traditional role of investigating financial crimes. And a lot of those financial crimes today, as you know, are committed online. And so the activity, for example, all of the online activity by organized crime, which are some of the most sophisticated actors that we confront in cyberspace, the U.S. Secret Service is exceeded by none in their expertise and the number of prosecutions and cases that they've brought against organized crime figures to both stop and deter financial crimes in cyberspace. Our ICE folks have their Homeland Security investigators who are also looking into crimes online related to theft of intellectual property, export-import using cyber, and things like human trafficking and online predators. So they're also very active in our cyber arena. Our S&T folks are very much involved with again, what I will talk about today, which is driving innovation and promoting innovation in the marketplace in cyber. Our intelligence and analysis folks are our conduit to the intelligence community, making sure that we have the threat information we need to inform our private sector partners and also to inform our activities going forward. Coast Guard, TSA, there are lots of folks within DHS who are part of this cyber mission, but I'm going to talk to you today about the work that we're doing in NPPD. As I said, we have the lead for the .gov, civilian.gov. And so to fulfill that function, we are sort of the arms and legs for OMB on FISMA, the Federal Information Management Security Act, helping departments and agencies assess and improve their cybersecurity. We have a couple of tools that help us do that. One is Einstein, which some of you may be familiar with, which is basically our intrusion prevention technology around the perimeter of the .gov. And the second one, which is continuous diagnostics and monitoring, which gets into the networks and systems of the departments and agencies, and in a near real-time basis can assess the health of that network, can identify risks within the system and network, and help departments and agencies prioritize which ones they need to address first. In both of these cases, we have operated the way we operate throughout this mission space, which is very much in partnership with the private sector. One of the things we did differently in our latest phase of Einstein, which is Einstein 3 Accelerated, or E3A, and with CDM, our Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, is that instead of the traditional government way of putting out an RFP for a technology, paying someone to develop this technology, which we now own, and which in this field, as you know, is going to be very promptly out of date, in a very dynamic threat environment, which we see in today's newspaper, right? I mean, the adversary is constantly inventing new ways to do harm to us. And we have to be equally agile and dynamic and flexible. And so realizing this, we've taken a slightly different approach in which we are working with the private sector, and what we are really effectively contracting for is outcome. And we are saying to the private sector, you tell us how you're going to achieve this outcome, what technology, processes, et cetera, you're going to use to be able to detect and prevent and block intrusions from coming into that perimeter, to be able to use government-furnished sensitive information to help you do that, to be able to protect that information, and to be able to innovate as technology and the threat changes. It's a different way of approaching it. It is, frankly, proven to be more difficult, a little trickier, a little more cumbersome, and take us a little bit longer, but I think in the end it will really pay off. But it's a big part of what we are trying to do. How can we in government, this is not something we're particularly good at, right? I'm talking about somebody in government trying to be agile, flexible, innovative, move fast, and that's just not something we're particularly traditionally good at. And so we are talking to our friends and partners in the private sector to say, help us think this through. How can we accomplish this objective? You guys are much better at it than we are. We need to really partner with you as full partners in this security solution set. As Ed said, I came up in the traditional intelligence community, spent a number of years at CIA, and in that traditional mindset, we viewed the private sector as somebody that we would go to when we had specific incredible threat information against one of your executives. That was, you were viewed as potential victims. And it's so different today in the Department of Homeland Security, in the mission space in which we are operating, where we really do have to view you as co-equal partners in finding the solution to the challenges that we face, that we have in common. The standard, understanding is that about 85%, and some people think it's a little more, some people think less, but we say 85% of the critical infrastructure in this country is owned by the private sector. So this is not that, again, that traditional U.S. government protecting U.S. government things. This is a true partnership in which we have to each bring our comparative advantage to the table. We have to understand each other's comparative advantages. And we have to have some sense of who can do what to address this challenge. But even at that traditional notion of defining roles and responsibilities is not agile enough, because that assumes a kind of top-down command and control, right? I've got this, you've got this, and that's kind of frozen in place. Again, be constantly reminding ourselves this is a very dynamic environment in which we're operating. So the area in which I have comparative advantage today, you might have that comparative advantage tomorrow, depending on what it is we're looking at and how the ground has shifted beneath us. The key is we have to have those trusted relationships, understand each other's capabilities, resources, incentives, and be prepared depending on what we see, to bring that all to the table in the best way possible to respond to what we're seeing. So again, it requires, an ability to sense the environment in which we're operating. It requires a good common understanding of each other's interests, objectives, goals, priorities, resources, capabilities, and the communication to be able to share that common operating picture and understand who's doing what, right? And that's a very complex challenge. And again, not a traditional place the government finds itself. So we need your help with this. One of the things that we're focused on right now is our C-cubed voluntary program. This is a program that the president asked us when in formulating a year ago, February, the executive order on cybersecurity and the Presidential Policy Directive 21 on strengthening critical infrastructure security and resilience. Among the tasks that the president gave to us was the task of helping to promote the cybersecurity framework that was developed by Commerce NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology, in the lead. And I would expect that a number of you were involved in what was a very collaborative process on their part to develop what I think is a very creative and useful framework, the cybersecurity framework. And our job now that that framework has been released, it is over to DHS to promote the use of this framework and promote the adoption of this framework across the country to try to raise cybersecurity. So C-cubed stands for critical infrastructure cyber communities. And it's a voluntary program. And it is targeted at, across the board, but we are putting a particular emphasis on small and medium-sized businesses. There's a sense that, the big guys are looking at this. I would not say they've all figured it out, and I'm amazed the number of times we will sit down with somebody who you think is a very sophisticated player, and you find that, they're not as far along as you might have thought or that they would like to be. And so we are certainly engaged in those kinds of conversations as well. But it is particularly a challenge, I think, for small and medium-sized businesses. And one of the things that this framework does is it tries to pick people up where they are. So it provides a framework in which a business can look to see and find their profile. Where are we now? And it gives you 5 basic categories that kind of line up nicely with our traditional risk management framework that we've traditionally used, where you need to start by identifying your assets. And I think this is a particularly important thing for everyone to do, which is figure out what it is that you would want to protect. What kind of information do you have that you would need to protect? Do you have customer information? Do you have intellectual property information? What are the operations that you may need to protect? Because increasingly we see that cyber attacks can have physical effects, that they are looking for ways to get into the control systems that operate the levers and the cranks and the mechanics and our operations, and cause not just a theft of information, not just identity theft or theft of intellectual property, but actual destruction of the kind that we saw at Saudi Aramco, where they turned 30,000, Jake, was it, computers into bricks through a cyber attack. And the kinds of things we worry about having an impact on the electric grid and elsewhere. And so, start by identifying the things that you need to protect. And then look at the ways in which you can protect that information, prevent things from happening, when and if something happens, respond effectively, recover, and then learn the lessons from it to begin that process again, to get ever smarter. And that is basically what we're all doing in this exercise. And it is an exercise in risk management, not risk elimination. This is not something where we're ever going to get a score of 100%. At least not anytime real soon. And so those things beyond, in the cybersecurity arena, we focused a lot on threat and vulnerability, not near enough on consequence. A big part of what we are trying to do in MPPD is to help understand interdependencies, and cascading consequences. The risk management exercise is about prioritizing your allocation of resources, right? That's one of the reasons that you engage in that exercise. We all have too many demands on our resources and not enough resources. We have to prioritize. You do that by understanding, what is the threat and the vulnerability to give you a sense of the likelihood of something bad happening, and then what are the consequences if it does. So we have spent a fair amount of time, and again, this was a task from the president in the executive order. We were asked to develop a list of entities where a successful cyber attack would have catastrophic consequences on national security, economic security, and public health and safety. And it is looking at those consequences that brings that physical expertise to bear along with the cyber and helps you to prioritize. And it is the kind of thing that all of you do, in your continuity of operations, continuity of business planning with respect to pandemics and storms, if the power goes out, right? What are the things that would be most affected and would have the greatest impact on your continuity of business? Those are the things that you want to fix first. And it's no different in the cyber arena. That's kind of how the cybersecurity framework encourages you to approach this. And start by looking at what your current posture is. Figure out, based on what you have to protect, your risk analysis, where you want to be in that. What is the profile you would like to achieve? And then you use the best practices that NIST put together in consultation with the business, with the private sector. I mean, they got all of these. These are existing standards, best practices that have been in use. They're sort of tried and true, and they're broken up into these categories. If you need to improve your response capability, go over to the right-hand column in the framework, and there is a whole set of standards, best practices, et cetera, to help you do that. And so it's a terrific, I think, tool for companies to use to improve their cybersecurity posture. We are getting out with a whole series of engagements with the private sector and working with the chamber, particularly targeting small and medium-sized businesses, to make sure folks are aware of it and to make sure they're aware of the resources that we can bring to bear to help them do that, particularly to help you find your current profile. So we have cybersecurity resilience reviews, which we will come out and do with you or give you the tool to do for yourself to review your current cybersecurity posture. Similar CSET, cybersecurity evaluation tool, a number of things that we have in place that are free that we offer to small and medium-sized businesses to get them started to help them improve their cybersecurity. But the most important thing that can be done is not really what are getting out and sort of this retail trying to market this, but really the market driving that improvement. Again, we're back to the market, looking to the market to try to improve, to try to achieve our common goals here. I am quite convinced that it's not until companies start asking their vendors about their cybersecurity. Venture capitalists, we've been out, we've all made a number of trips out to California. Our deputy secretary was out there yesterday. And we're out talking to investors in New York, in DC, in California, venture capitalists, to say, if you're making an investment and you are not making sure and doing the due diligence on the cybersecurity posture of that enterprise that you're thinking of investing in, you are not doing effective risk management. You are making a mistake. Those are the kinds of questions that are going to drive up cybersecurity. I've been working with the American Bar Association to do similar kind of thing, to talk to lawyers who do due diligence on mergers and acquisitions. They need to make sure that part of what they're looking at or their team is looking at is the cybersecurity posture. I can't tell you how many companies I've talked to who said, yeah, we bought this little company and we brought them into our system and lo and behold, they were riddled with malware. And it's just been a nightmare because it all came into our system and now we have to clean it all out. Well, wouldn't it be so much better if you asked those questions ahead of time before making that move? If, we spend a lot of time thinking about supply chain security and risk. Think about your suppliers and their cybersecurity posture. Ask those questions. one of the things that we are doing is developing these sets of questions. So you're thinking, not you, because I think you all are pretty savvy on this, but you might have folks who are thinking, I don't know what questions to ask. We're working on that, trying to provide a basic set of questions that you could ask that would begin that conversation to help inform you and drive better decisions on the part of the people you're interacting with. I've long said that if I were an entrepreneur, if I were an inventor, and I was looking for a law firm to do my intellectual property work, my trademark work, whatever it is, copyright, that patent work, and I didn't ask that law firm about their cybersecurity practices and posture, that I'd be making a huge mistake. But I think increasingly it's this notion of an educated consumer. Increasingly, if we give people the tools to ask those questions, the market will drive increased cybersecurity investment. Interesting opinion on the FTC's authority yesterday, FTC v. Wyndham, where a judge ruled that the FTC had authority under deceptive practices provision to sue for a cyber breach. Those sorts of things also will begin to drive decisions and make the business case for the return on investment. But a big part of our objective is to drive innovation in the marketplace. As I said, it's not entirely clear to me all the ways in which we can do that, but I would love to hear from you on better ways that we could partner with you to achieve some of these objectives that I know we share. So I will stop there and hope that maybe you've got some questions or even better, some suggestions or comments for me.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And feel free to flag a question. Let me just do one comment. As you talk about risk management, and I think you touched on liability being able to play a role for companies, it's obviously one, an awareness issue, and then the cost effectiveness factor. But I think over the last couple of years, I think what may well have also altered is who are they trying to protect against is not, it's a range of players from small cyber crimes, hackers, to governments, to whatever. And I think that's probably for a lot of companies still is a question. Where risk management on both ends of the scale, how do I deal with it? And I'm not sure there's an answer for that, but we have a long time been urging that people need to pay more attention to this, that on the one hand we want to talk up using the internet and using it all, on the other hand kind of whisper, but be careful, because it's really not as secure as people thought. But I do think there is, and I praise your approach sounds exactly right on. Using what NIST did, I think, was very helpful, and playing that and getting it out there is all valuable. It still seems to me like there's probably a huge part of the American relevant, however critical infrastructure, but that is just not there, is not even close to there, and absent a Pearl Harbor type thing, even though we've had a few pretty good bombing runs on target or whatever, that we're not going to get there. I don't know how you bridge that gap. I think what you're doing is great, but it does feel to me like the threat is increasing and the vulnerability is only slightly decreasing.
Well, let's start. You started with, trying to understand the nature of the threat and what are we protecting against, right? And you're absolutely right. We've got a broad range of actors, and that the low-end actors are getting more sophisticated every day as the high-end actors are getting more sophisticated every day. The whole enterprise is moving toward greater sophistication. What we have seen most of is financial related, right? It's financial related crime. It is, what makes it into the press, of course, are the big identity theft cases. And in part, I think that's because of state laws that require breach notification. But, we worry a lot, as you read, about the theft of intellectual property. And that's a mix of actors. I think what we're trying to do with the cybersecurity framework, we work with folks who face threats across that spectrum. A big part of what we try to do is to get as much information out publicly and to our partners as we can with regard to the nature of the threat. And one of the things that we've been able to do is to clear more private sector folks so that we can share classified information with them, so that they can help us write more actionable, unclassified reports. To say, this is what would be really useful for folks to have in that unclassified report. The stuff about sources and methods, is not. And therefore we can produce unclassified product. Our goal is to get stuff out as widely as we can. The small amount of stuff that's left then that's classified is where we have worked with the private sector to develop in the .gov, the E3A, and in the private sector, something called Enhanced Cybersecurity Services, where we work with the private sector providers of managed security services if they will build a system that can protect sensitive government information and make use of it to enhance the services they can provide to their customers. That's what the Enhanced Cybersecurity Services program is all about. It is about trying to find ways to use that classified information to assist a wide range of stakeholders without having to clear everyone. And we've been very successful with that, actually. We've got a couple of providers who are on board, and we've got quite a few more who are in the queue. And these are careful negotiations. And one of the things that makes these such careful conversations is our commitment to privacy and civil rights and civil liberties. And one of the things that you'll appreciate, one of the reasons I enjoy being at the Department of Homeland Security, is that it has the first statutory privacy officer in the federal government. And we have in NPPD our own privacy officer. And all of our programs go through that privacy review. They all have privacy impact assessments, which are public and posted online. We have an advisory board of privacy advocates who have clearances, with who we can sit down and talk through our programs from the inception so that privacy is baked in from the very beginning and not tacked on at the end. And so, all of those things come together. Our relationships with our private sector partners are very open and transparent. And so, that is how we are able to develop these kinds of systems and take advantage of their expertise to help us get information out much more broadly. We do have, I've talked a lot about our relationship with businesses, but we do have a whole campaign targeting the general public, increasing public awareness, called Stop, Think, Connect. And it really, the message is that simple, that before you click on that link, before you go to that web page, before you open that attachment, think about it. Think about whether there's something strange here, something fishy, something doesn't hit you as quite right before you connect. But at the end of that is connect, which gets to your point. We are not about discouraging the use of the internet. In fact, one of the things that I remind folks quite frequently is cybersecurity is not the goal. Cybersecurity is a means to an end. The end is to allow us, all of us, to make to get the maximum benefit from the wonderful opportunities that a networked world has to offer us, right? That's what we're really about. And we can only do that if we figure out how to do it where it's necessary and where appropriate, the appropriate security is there. But it's easy to lose sight, particularly when you're in my business, and think that it's all about what you're doing. And what we're doing is just enabling, the use of all of the things that the networked world brings us. Yeah.
Good afternoon, and thanks for taking the time to hang out with us, and for a very interesting set of thoughts there. I wanted to sort of touch on something that you had, I think, come at from a couple of different angles, but to sort of put a pin in, and that is kind of privacy and the personal data that may come with, sort of threat vectors or kind of whatever else. A couple of questions. I think from our perspective, it seems like the Snowden revelations of the past year have made that question a lot more difficult, obviously, and so to the extent that you have sort of have seen that from the government side and can comment on that, that'd be great. And then, the second question I wanted to sort of raise is from your perspective, is the whole idea of private data in threat models, I don't know, overblown maybe, or sort of out of perspective? How often, is that really a thing that happens a lot, or are these threat indicators, do they often not contain personal data that we need to be worried about? It seems to me that sort of data would be much more technical and much less concerned with the information about, whatever it is, the email address that got hacked or what have you. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Yes. Starting with your first point, the Snowden has made maintaining, building and sustaining that trust all the more important, and something that we have redoubled our efforts to make sure that we do. As I say, that has always been a cornerstone of what we do, and it has never been more important. And so, it has, I will be candid with you, it comes up in our conversations with our foreign counterparts. It comes up in our conversations often with our private sector folks. But again, we have this open kind of relationships with folks. And we have spent a number of years building those relationships of trust and continue to do so. And so we're just redoubling our efforts to make sure that we are able to communicate that and sustain it. And again, part of the way we do that is doing these privacy assessments of the work that we're doing. So when we set up an intrusion prevention system, E3A, that is going to be loaded with threat indicator information that it can then look for and block, we have a very careful process that we sit down with our privacy folks and say, here's the steps we're going to go through to make sure that we are only including that technical data that is necessary to include here, and that any sensitive PII is not a part of that. Where it is not essential to accomplish the function here. And again, part of what we're doing is moving toward more and more automation. We've developed a language, because one of the challenges in sharing threat indicator information is not everybody structures it in the same way. And so we've developed a structured language for the way in which we will present indicator information. And we've come up with that with our privacy folks sitting right next to us. How can we structure this in a way that is consistent with fair information practice principles and privacy protections? We've developed a what we call TAXI, which is trusted automated exchange of indicator information. And that is the mechanism by which that structured threat information is transmitted. Again, all of this was developed with our privacy folks in mind, and with the goal of both being able to share that information in a matter of seconds rather than days or even hours, because that's the speed with which we often need to move. But also because machine to machine is generally more privacy protected. And so we really do work on a regular basis to, as I say, from the very beginning up front, figure out how can we accomplish the imperative that we have here in a way that is consistent with our privacy requirements and the need to sustain and build that trust, not just with our private sector partners, but with the American people. Yeah.
First of all, thanks for helping us understand the complexity of what you're wrestling with. I think probably the more we think about it, the more humble we are in terms of asking any questions. But I guess the question I'd like to ask, I don't know how far you can go, but obviously there's been probably a lot of threats that have been headed off over time. And the tough thing is the government can't really talk about that in much detail because it admits methods and all that. I'm curious if there's any way you could give us some sort of feel for things that have been headed off in some way that we could, kind of relish in the fact that we've actually had, successes against complex schemes. But kind of a softball question, I guess. What could you say?
Not as soft as you might think. Because you're right. I mean, part of the way that we build and sustain that trust with our private sector partners is that we don't go around speaking publicly about, company X, this happened, and we were able to go in and help them, identify and figure out what it was and mitigate, et cetera. And that's, we can have a debate, and the debate has been raging for many years about the value of publicizing, intrusions and more of that activity. That's not our role. Our role is to be there to help when we can and to build that trust. Having said that, I can say we've had great success in preventing things from coming through. And I don't have my notes here with my statistics at the ready. Jake may have some, but I can tell you, for example, with respect to the .gov, already we've only had our Einstein 3A in place for a relatively short while, and we're only so far covering about 25% of the government. But if I recall my statistics from this morning correctly, we've already prevented 68,000 intrusions, malware, bad things getting into the system. That if you have any familiarity with the scale of the activity nationwide, that's not a huge percentage of what's going on nationwide, but it's a really good statistic with regard to what's coming at the .gov over the period of time that we've been in place. I think since 2008, we've issued about 500,000 alerts, which is, again, telling folks, look, we've seen this vulnerability, we've seen this kind of a attack vector, here are some things that you ought to do, some mitigations that you ought to put in place. And so, this is a very active arena in which we are, trying to keep, if not always steps ahead of the bad guys, at least not far behind them. And again, working with the private sector, and they often are the ones who will see threat indicators and information that we won't see. The kinds of things that come at the private sector look a little bit different often than what comes after the .gov. But because we've built those trusted relationships, particularly through our information sharing and analysis centers, they will share with us what they're seeing. And so one company sharing what they see with us, without us attributing it to that company, we are in a position then to take that, analyze it, verify it, develop mitigation measures, and get it out, much more broadly to all the folks that might be affected. So it's hard to quantify. We often get asked to quantify, the number of attacks, the, dollar value, et cetera, et cetera. And it really, because companies are reluctant to share that information. And so you really don't know whether you're just seeing the tip of an iceberg, right? And because, again, we don't have a lot of stories we can tell in public, but it's very difficult to quantify. But we feel quite confident, given what we see, that we are, again, in partnership with other parts of the government, the FBI, the intelligence community, and others, and in partnership with the private sector, very much making a difference. And we are challenging the adversaries to get, to have to come up with new ways of going about this. So I don't know if that gives you any more insight than you had when you asked the question.
I have a stream of questions, but they're right in the same line. But that's helpful.
All right.
Very helpful. Thanks.
I'm sorry, you had your hand up for a while.
I'm interested to know, having listened to the scale of the challenge and the type of programs you have here in the United States, how you perceive the process of business continuity, resilience, compares in the United States in comparison to other jurisdictions around the world. Because obviously for the US, the resilience of its partners is normally indirectly a vulnerability for the United States, whether an economic one or potentially a military vulnerability. Sometimes it could be a direct vulnerability. And I wondered what you're doing with international partners and how you compare the activities you have in train with what they're doing. Is the US leading in terms of its sophistication on this? Which other jurisdictions around the world are doing a good job as well?
Well, it is interesting. One of the things I've seen over my career in national security generally is that we all come at this a little bit differently based on our experience. One of the ways that that manifests itself is that we all are bearing different scars in some ways, and so we have different areas of emphasis and we have different sensitivities. I've often long thought that it's fascinating to me for the longest time, and I think this might be changing slightly, but that our sense of privacy vis-a-vis the government and vis-a-vis the private sector has actually been sort of a mirror image of the European sense. That we, because of our history, and we are very sensitive about privacy when it comes to the government. We are worried about what the government can do with that information. Right? They can lock me up. Whereas the private sector, they can interrupt me at dinner. They can annoy me with ads. But I'm much less concerned, a hypothetical American, I'm much less concerned about privacy vis-a-vis the private sector as opposed to vis-a-vis the government. And I think what fascinated me early on in my career in national security was engaging in conversations with our counterparts elsewhere in the world whose constituents would say, I'm not worried about the government having this information. The government needs this information to keep me safe. So that's worth it to me. Whereas the private sector, they don't need this information. Why should they have this information about me? And so their data privacy laws in Europe were much more advanced vis-a-vis the private sector than our data privacy laws vis-a-vis the private sector. And the opposite, I think, has been the case with respect to the government. So I think we do come at this in different ways. We do have different strengths and weaknesses. Again, we have different comparative advantages. We are committed to a voluntary approach with our private sector folks who are in the unregulated businesses. And I have noticed, in some of our foreign counterparts, a greater acceptance or willingness, let's say, to go down a more regulatory, mandatory path. So that's certainly, one of the differences that I've seen. I think we jumped on the critical infrastructure issue a little sooner than a number of our counterparts. And understanding the importance of that relationship and building those relationships and this effort of prioritizing critical infrastructure, understanding these interdependencies and cascading consequences, which we've been modeling for years now in the physical side and are now bringing to bear very much to help us understand potential physical consequences from cyber attacks. And so there are some of those areas where I think we've got a little bit of a jump on things, but there is so much need for creative thinking out there and innovation that every time I meet with our foreign counterparts, we get some new ideas. Things, because they're approaching it with a different perspective. It is the value of diversity on any team. And we very much look at our international partners as part of our team. Yeah.
Hi, when you're approaching business or trying to work with business with like this proactive lens, I'm wondering how you navigate some of the concerns. Obviously, businesses don't like to have to address this, or they certainly don't like it to be very public. And then in some industries like healthcare, there's HIPAA and liability issues. So how do you boost the confidence that this type of partnership is not going to expose them to either embarrassment or liability?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that very early on when the department was first created, and there was part of what are the only new things in the department as opposed to all the things that they sort of brought in from other places and put together, which has been very powerful. But one of the new things was this focus on infrastructure protection. So way back in 2002 when the department was created, they were thinking about this and looking at that risk management framework where you look at threats and vulnerabilities and consequences, and recognizing that the vulnerability part was going to be really important but really hard for all the reasons that you just explained. And how were we going to work in partnership and create that trust such that we could come together and put this information on the table so that we could think through it together. And so Congress, in its wisdom, created a regime, a legal framework for us to protect that information. PCII, the Protected Critical Infrastructure Information regime. And it was part of the CIAA, Critical Infrastructure Assurance Act or something. But in any event, it allows us to get information, allows companies to give us information related to their vulnerabilities, related to that risk management on a voluntary basis, and requires us to protect it very carefully. And protects it from FOIA, from civil litigation. We are not allowed to provide it, for example, to their regulators. That's an area that is often misunderstood by companies. It's not that information can't be used by regulators if the regulators get it through some other means, but we don't. We are not allowed to share it. And it's actually been very successful. We have never in the 12 years that we've been working with private sector and sharing this kind of information, we've never had a leak of information that's been provided to us under that regime. And that's part of how we build that trust. And again, our mission is not to do law enforcement in NPPD. And so, you don't have to worry that when you come to us, it's going to result in a public, prosecution. Although a lot of folks want to go after those bad guys, and that's a really good thing. We need to have more prosecutions in this arena. And we're not regulators, except for chemical facility anti-terrorism standards. And so our objective is to provide the assistance to help you figure out what's happened here, understand how to mitigate it, prevent bad things from happening. That's we're about, trying to lift the cybersecurity for all of our stakeholders at the state and local, territorial and tribal level, the private sector, in the public sector, across departments and agencies. So that's probably a good place to stop.
You've answered almost everything really important that I wanted to ask. In the back of my mind, I am wondering, however, in many areas, the offense or defense. And I'm wondering to what extent, U.S. government clearly has offensive capabilities here, to what extent you are getting the benefit of their skills and technique and penetration to enhance your ability to defend. You probably can't talk about it.
You're right. But I think I indicated earlier, we get information from a wide variety of sources, and we have a very collaborative relationship with our interagency partners, and certainly we rely on the intelligence community to help us have situational awareness and share situational awareness with our partners. And we work hard to, as I said, to get information declassified so that we can get it as disseminated as broadly as we can. We are determined that the assistance we provide is going to be informed by, all of the information that the government has at its disposal. So.
Not only skilled, but diplomatic. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you all very much.